So if we click on our base object, we can now add a bezel modifier to our base object just to give it that lovely edge. And if you look at the edge of this object, you'll notice that it's all bezeled now. And then we can simply shade smooth, give it that rounded edge finish. It's not bezeled too much, but it's not bezeled too little. So from here on out, what we'd actually like to do is to cut some additional circles in these objects for our additional buttons. So what we'd like to get started with is a circle. So let's tab out. Let's add our cursor above this button right there, and let's add a circle. Let's rotate the circle on the x-axis 90 degrees. Let's shrink it down just a little bit, and let's move it down a little bit more, and that looks pretty good. Let's move it out just a little bit. So tab in on our object, and now what we can actually do is to separate these objects. So I can separate that object and separate the additional one on the right hand corner. Let's separate that as well. So now if we tab out, you'll notice that these objects are essentially separated. But we can clearly see that there's something not too correct, something wrong with our object in the center. What we can do is add an additional loop cut, and let's bring this loop cut out, and that right there tends to look pretty nice. So simple solutions like that, and we've automatically fixed our object. Let's save this, what we've got so far. And let's continue to create our additional buttons right over here. So what we're going to do is shrink wrap this once again. Let's go to our modifiers tab, shrink wrap it to this object right there. And we want this to be on method, we want it to be projection on positive, and we want to project it on the y-axis. So once we click on both of these and we join these objects, so now that we've got that, we can click on our left controller. We can tab in, click 6 to tab in. And essentially what we'd like to do is to create some additional loop cuts. So let's come over to our edge and let's click Control A. Basically, we want to apply all transform, and this gives our object a really nice smoothing effect. This really does give it the finishing effect, and we can actually do the same thing with the display. Now with these control edges, what we actually want to do is to tab in, and let's go to X-ray mode. And with these faces, we actually just want to press F to fill these faces. So with this object, let's tab in. Let's go to X select all three of these edges, and let's bring these. So let's select this edge. Let's bring this one backwards. Let's select this one. Let's bring this edge down just a little bit, and let's select the top one. And let's just bezel this top edge right there. So now that we've got those edges, separated a little bit, if we tap back out, that actually looks far better. It actually gives our console a very retro look, which is exactly what we like. It's exactly what we'd like to go for. Now at the bottom, if you want to do the same thing, you can, absolutely. You can tab in, and with these faces, you can essentially just move them backwards just a little bit, move them along, and just bezel this edge if you'd like. Once again, you can move these back into place, gives it that lovely finishing touch, but we're really giving it a nice arcade vibe. So Control S to save that. So on our left controller, we can tab in, we can go to face select, and what we can do is actually just cut out some of these faces. So using our knife, we can actually just make some really nice cuts along these faces. We can make some additional cuts if we would like. So now we've got a few faces right there cut out, so that's looking pretty good. Now let's go to object mode, and of course we can add a shrink wrap to this object. So naturally we'd like to create this circle, so we want to add our cursor right about there. We want to get ourselves a circle, and we want to rotate this on the x-axis 90 degrees and bring the size down just a little bit. So like that tends to look really nice, to be honest. So now we can add a shrink wrap to this material. For a target, we can click on the actual object, and once again we'd like to project this shrink wrap on the Y, on positive. And if we go to our object, we can now tab in, and with the face selector we can delete this face right there. So now this face is deleted, and with both objects selected, just shift select both objects. We can Control J to join both objects, and once we tab in, we can now connect these objects. So we need some additional loop cuts just around there to make sure we can connect all of our object. We need some additional loop cuts at the bottom as well. We need some additional loop cuts on the sides, additional loop cuts on both sides actually. And the technique that we're going to be using is typically the same technique we've used before. We're just joining these. So if I click there, I can join those two. If I click there, I can join those two. There we go. We can join all of them just like that, nice and simple. So I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to show you a time lapse now, so you can just add these objects with the same method that I'm showing you right now. So once you've got everything done, you can actually just click F to join all to fill this gap right there. Then we can insert and extrude a little bit like that. But actually we can insert a little bit more, and perhaps then we can extrude. That tends to look a little bit better. So we've got an object just like that. We can just extrude just like that, and that tends to look pretty good, I'd say. So we can save that. And what we want to do is essentially do the exact same thing on the right hand side. So like I said previously, we will be doing the identical thing on this side. So naturally, tab out, let's get ourselves another circle, and let's rotate the circle on the x-axis 90 degrees, and let's zoom this down, put this into correct position, and let's bring it outward. Let's move it outwards just a little bit, not too much of course. And once we're tabbed into our object, we're going to use the same tool we used before, and that's our knife cutter. And it's the identical thing that we've done before. We just want to cut out our edges, try to get them to align, but if they don't align, then it's really not the end of the world. We can cut out some additional ones just along there as well. So now that we've cut those out, we can actually delete this face just as we did before. And you can probably guess what we're going to do. We're going to shrink wrap this circle once again. Did the same thing before. And we want the method to be on project, on Y, on positive. So let's get our circle. Let's shrink wrap our circle once again to this object. We want it to be on Y. We want it to be on project as well. So now we can bring our object down closer to our controller on the right. There we go. Tab into our controller, and we want to delete this face. We can join both objects. So Control J to join both objects. So like I said previously, we need some additional loop cuts along our edges. Some additional loop cuts right there as well. Loop cuts all around. It's identical to what we did before on the opposite side. And now we can just join these objects. So we can simply just start joining just like that. So our object does look a little bit rough, but it is joined and it is working quite perfectly. And that's what really matters. So with our circle now, we can have all of this selected, and we can fill this gap, and we can extrude it down and intrude it inwards. So once we go back out into object mode, we can have a look at how this looks, and I'd say that looks about good. We can select all of this, and we can actually extend it or expand it if we think it's not large enough. And if we tab back out, take a look once more, you see that it looks somewhat better, I'd say for sure. So that's good progress that we've made so far. That's really good.